Welcome back to Mondays with Megan. Um, I wanted to continue sharing a bit of my journey out of the woke ideology. I think I had shared some of the first cracks after my upbringing and indoctrination, even in the public schools 25 to 30 years ago. When I started public schools, when I started in the public school, there was still some pretty massive indoctrination. That's one of the things that I hadn't shared yet as part of my story, is that I remember being told explicitly and implicitly since about kindergarten that there might not be a livable planet for your generation's children. So I was terrified into deciding I didn't want children. And I didn't, because I didn't think that there would, I thought the planet would be like smoke and creosote and just devastation and destruction wrought by a human being. So I also was taught, why would I want to create any more human beings when the ones that are here are so destructive? I thought that it was morally questionable at best to have children. And so I not only judged my, future self and all of the uh, kids my age for having who would go on to have kids, but I also judged myself for being a kid and for taking up so many resources. So I and I just did not question that at all until this year. Climate change, as I've mentioned, was the last domino to fall for me. Um, and I was an environmental activist for a very, very long time. In fact, I felt like I was less than if I didn't go chain my neck to a bulldozer working on a pipeline. And this was the kind of thing that went on in my head for years and years and years. And so I was just very indoctrinated from an early age. I would not say that the woke ideology had infected public schools at that point, but infiltration was well on its way. So because the people who are behind this power grab that's making society so psychotic is they play the long game. And that's why we all feel pretty short-sighted. And in fact, I was kind of taught implicitly not to play the long game because there wasn't going to be a planet when I was an adult. So it was quite a brilliant strategy. It's unfortunately very wrong, but I watched An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, and I remember being sick to my stomach enough that I did not sleep for weeks. I have had nightmares about environmental catastrophes since I was 3 years old, and they haven't stopped. So there's that. But I also want to be clear. I'm not saying that there's no damage to the environment. So don't hear what I'm not saying. But the dire histrionic hand wringing of people who actually use very genocidal language towards humans is unjustified. So anyway, jumping forward now from when I was part of that writers group that started to focus more on making identity proprietary rather than craft. And I had said, yeah, I'm not going to be part of this. I think that people should be able to write whoever they want as long as they do it well. And that actually, at that point, society had not gotten so fragilized. We hadn't been so intent on content warnings, trigger warnings, safe spaces, forcing others to caretake our feelings as adults with the whole impact matters more than intention. Yeah, I totally hurled that at all my friends. Don't think that's true anymore. But we hadn't really quite gotten to the level of fragilization that we're at now. So they actually listened, and we went back to talking about craft for a while until the further entrenching of the woke ideology infection. But I remember kind of being really nervous about that and thinking, I don't think this is over. I think that this is more than just my writers group, because where did they get these ideas? And as I talked about in a previous video, that this ideology, especially the trans ideology, but also the DEI, woke, anti-racism, all of this has the markings of a very top-down control schema, not a grassroots fight for the underdog, really give voice to the actual marginalized people. But I didn't know what to do. And I also didn't see that there was much, I didn't see many other people who were questioning this. Maybe it's just because I live in a super liberal city, but which at this point, liberal is not even the word for it. But so I kind of kept my mouth shut, tried to keep my head down, like most people. I wanted to belong. I wanted to have access. I wanted to the things I wanted, which is what all humans, which is what all humans want. So, and I continued, marching in all the parades, going to the protests, trying to be a good white ally, and being a radical feminist too. But I started to feel like this was very performative, and that a lot of the other people around me were also being very performative, and that I didn't know how helpful is that actually. Like, how helpful is compulsory allyship? How helpful is compulsory identification? And how helpful is just this, oh, we give lip service to this thing? I mean, that doesn't really, to me, seem like we've actually made any progress. In fact, what it does is it actually just forces whatever racism is actually there, whatever sexism is actually there, whatever transphobia is actually there underground. So it's racism with a smile. In fact, I've heard many people who lived through the 60s, when they were trying to tear down segregation instead of advocate for it under a different name called safe spaces. Now, I do think there's a place for safe spaces, and I'm going to talk about that in another video in my next one. But it's probably not gonna be what you think. And people who were alive in the 60s feel pretty disrespected by what's going on now. Most people that I've talked to, and they say, I don't know why, we weren't ever trying to control people's language. We weren't ever trying to, like, there's this list going around, harmful words. What? No. Harmful is in the ear of the receiver. America was on that list. Are you kidding me right now? We're so fragilized that people can't say words that are on this list. That's called codependency, folks. It's called being a child. I don't treat other adults that way. Anyway, so I was starting to really question my involvement in a lot of these protests, organizations, rallies, meetings, where it was demanded of me to be a white ally. And I was told what to do. I was told when to speak. I was told when not to speak. But I was also told both white silence is violence, and if I speak up, I'm centering myself. And there wasn't really a distinction about when those things were true and when they weren't true. And asking any question got me, educate yourself. And I was like, so I'm trying to do that. And so I would ask other white people and they wouldn't know either. So I started to see some contradictions or some difficulty with this ideology, but I didn't abandon it because I was like, no, I'm on the side of right. I want social justice. I was even trying to figure out how I could have a social justice career, like many of the people in my generation and now Gen Z below me. So I didn't actually question that the ideology itself was defective. I kept gaslighting myself, thinking, I just don't understand. I'm just not good enough. My intrinsic racism is blinding me to just basic critical thinking that everybody has access to, and can perform and again, all disability caveats aside, I that was the identity that I chose to most identify with. Yeah, I should be a writer. That I chose to most advocate for, because I have a disability. You wouldn't be able to tell. And that was actually something that I thought was a big problem. It was like invisible disability kind of has this catch-22, because you have to be disabled enough to prove that you're disabled, but you also have to be able to function on your own enough to not be labeled as freeloading or asking for handouts or all of that. So I've had significant issues actually in the culture with my invisible disability. So that was the identity that I chose mostly to advocate for. And I would say that went well for a bit, but everything eventually started to turn back to racism. So I wasn't allowed to speak as a person with an invisible disability, two, in fact, on my quote lived experience because I was white. And I was like, so why is racism the worst oppression? Because in China during the Cultural Revolution, didn't they say that they focused on class? Didn't they do the exact same thing that we're doing with race, but they did it with class? So there was just this declaration that racism was the worst oppression. And I'm kind of thinking like, well, globally and historically, the most marginalized minority group has actually been women. And anytime I would try to say anything about like, here's actual data, here are actual facts, like the abolish the police movement, cutting police officers actually does not reduce use of lethal force or lethal force incidents at all. It actually does the opposite. I would get told I'm centering myself and I needed to shut up like a good white person and let BIPOC talk. Well, turns out that a lot of the friends I have that are BIPOC are actually pretty insulted by this lowering of standards so that everything is equal, which I think we talked about last week. Equity and equality are not the same. So, and I'm not saying all BIPOC, because again, we cannot talk about any group as a monolith. So when we say all blank people are this, all white people are this, all BIPOC are this, that's inherently prejudice and judgmental and is questionable. So I started to question those things, and I wouldn't get thoughtful, considerate, kind answers like the other side was demanding from us. Well, we need empathy, we need understanding, we need inclusion. But I would get these very harsh, incredibly harsh responses back. And they're not really responses. They were accusations and they were just shutdowns. And no one else was saying anything. So I was like, okay, I just started to be silent. But it wasn't because I agreed. It wasn't because I thought this was okay. I just had no idea how to approach it. So that happened for quite a long time. Several years, in fact. Now, thankfully, I had some friends who, and I still have them, who are not gung-ho, woke, progressive, radical leftists. And they would periodically push back or question or not respond, not fuel the fire. And they would, they would be like, I'm worried about, you're angry all the time, which, yeah, that's one of the mantras of the woke ideology, which is something we're going to talk about in yet another video. And they would say things like, I'm concerned about you. So they were the ones that were offering actual kindness. So I started to listen more to them. And then the 2016 election happened. So we're going to talk about that in the next video. I know I said we'd talk about safe spaces in the next video. So we're going to do 2016 election, safe spaces and what I think about that. And then in the video after that, and probably that'll be combined with the focus on feelings and stay angry. So stay tuned for more Mondays with Megan. If you wanted to subscribe to my newsletter, which is focusing on what the left gets right, because I am not about entrenching in division, and I'm not about throwing my former self or some of my current friends under the bus. I do not believe in cutting off relationship as an act of political activism or moral activism. So I am working very hard to find common ground with the left still. So you can find that as well as my other tiers of subscriptions that will be focusing on different things like how to do research in a censorship world, and how to preserve and build mental health in the age of globalization. Those are different tiers of subscription at meganwildhood.com. I will put a link in the description below. And you can also follow my channels, which are linked in the description, my alternative channels, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to get kicked off YouTube at some point, in the links just on BitChute and Rumble, in the links in the description below this video. So that's all for now. And I'll see you next Monday on Mondays with Megan. Okay, bye.